break. Yeah. Questions? Yeah.
I would like, Robina, I would like to ask whether it's wise to sort of avoid exposing myself to suffering in the form of the mass media, television, radios, newspapers, etc.
Yep.
That's full of
That's right.
the evil and the
That's right.
hardships of
That's
the
right.
world.
Exactly.
And I have always been suggesting to my friends, to my patients, to avoid that as much as possible.
You know, I forget your name. Forgive me.
Prem.
Thank you, Prem. I'm so sorry. So listen, Prem, again, it's like I said over here, it's all a question of where you're at. So in the wisdom wing, strictly speaking, the wisdom wing work is like the retreat mode. Back off and leave the world alone. Get into your own head, look at your mind, work stuff out, really understand yourself, okay? And now, you also need the world for that, because the stuff out there triggers your attachment, it triggers your anger, it triggers your fear. So from that perspective, it's excellent to see the world, but if you can handle it, if you can use it to see your own mind, not just have a panic attack and think it's so depressing you want to kill yourself. So it's up to you to know where you're at. So it can be incredibly useful, even for the wisdom wing, for yourself. You don't just look, oh my God, that world is so evil out there, I can't stand it. That's panic. You see, what does it bring up in you? And then even, I tell you, a very powerful one is this. From the wisdom wing perspective, the discussion, the compassion is another discussion, which I'll go to in a second, okay? But first of all, a typical response for us is how awful the world is. Look at all this suffering, look at all this evil, look at all this stuff, look at the terrorists, look at the pedophiles. Oh my God, what is this? Why is this? How is this? This is too terrible. Isn't it? This is how it is, isn't it? It's overwhelming for us. So if you're taking the Buddhist view, everything out there is you use it as grist for the mill to explain karma to you, to explain look at the crazy world out there, look at their delusions, look at the attachment, look at the anger. But then you go, and this is my favourite saying to myself, instead of putting myself separate from it, I go, I recognise that. Or, thank you for showing me how not to be. Then it's used as a teaching. It's sort of like if you can't stand looking at ugly, cancerous bodies, then fine, but if you're a surgeon, you want to look at cancerous, ugly bodies because you can't wait to analyse it and understand it. Now, from that perspective, it's fantastic to look at the world. You must look at the world. If you can. If it's too scary and it's too difficult and it's too much pain, avoid. So you've got to know where you're at. Now, then the next step is the compassion wing. You need the crazy world for the compassion wing. They are grist for your mill. You know, as one of my lamas said, bodhisattvas, these high evolved beings, the great saints, he says they need their enemies even. That's really the grist for the mill, because you see the whole world is in the same boat, all insane, all causing suffering and all suffering. So you've got to look at the world. So we've got to know where we're at in relation to how we can use what we see for our own development and for our growth of compassion.
My idea is that most people, myself included, are mostly unaware of the teaching of the Buddha.
Of course. But don't use the word Buddha. It's common sense what I'm saying.
Yes, yes. Well, common sense isn't that common.
No, it's not. No. So therefore, that's why you've got to know where you're at.
Yes. So my idea was, since I am not really able to use this...
Don't be ridiculous, Prem. Of course you can. You can't say you're not. Don't you lie to me. You are... No question you're in this world and you're using it to help you develop to become a better person, and you're seeing it out there and you're seeing it in yourself. Don't tell me you're not doing that. I believe you are. You sound to me like you are. No?
I'm speaking on a personal level and saying that when I watch a film where some Arab decapitates some Iranian or whatever
that's right.
On the film,
yes.
on the YouTube,
that's right.
That makes me feel extremely bad inside, even though I am aware of the common sense. Okay, then I don't know why you would bother. I don't look at the YouTube and see Arabs cut off heads of Iranians. I just have to hear about it enough. So don't torture ourselves unnecessarily. All you've got to do is hear about the suffering world. It's enough to go, yeah, I recognise that. That's anger. That's paranoia. Thank you for showing me how not to be. Good enough, Prem. Don't have to sort of watch pornography to realise how pornography is ridiculous. That's absurd. Yes.
But you know it's happening.
Exactly.
You can't avoid it.
That's my point. We do know that it's happening. I mean, There is not one person alive that does not know that there is...
So then I'm confused about your point then. What's your point then?
Bad stuff going on.
Yeah.
Should we expose ourselves to this? I mean, there are...
So sorry, stop. I'm a bit confused now, Prem. Sorry, please forgive me. Okay. So do you mean consciously don't look at the news and don't look at the internet and don't read papers? Are you suggesting that first? Is that a good move? I would say yes, it's a good move for a person who's overwhelmed by suffering themselves and can't cope. Yes, Prem, it's according to your level. Then if you've got more courage and know yourself, then you can start to see other people, and instead of going, oh, look at those people out there, they're so negative, which is what we tend to do, arrogantly, I'll go, I recognise that. It might not be, I don't want to cut somebody's head off, but excuse me, I recognise anger. I recognise extreme, absurd views, and I just have to go, thank you for showing me how not to be, and learn from it. If I'm brave enough, the next one is even have compassion for the guy who cuts the head off.
Okay.
Because he's deluded and he's going to cause himself immense suffering, the Buddha would say. So it's a question of level and degree of where you're at. It's like learning music. You don't keep going to the high music first if you're only in grade 1. That's why this approach in the Tibetan Buddhists, it sounds kind of weird to say it's all graded, but it's true. You've got to know where you're at. And then you take on what you can. The great bodhisattvas are in the middle of the nightmares. They would rather live with a person they hate than a person they're attached to because they're wanting to work on their minds at the deepest level. So it's a question of where we're at, Prem.
Yes. And on the same token, how about the negative thoughts that keep coming into the mind?
Same. Like I said before, we've got to see them all. They're all your thoughts. They're just habits. They're just imprints. Nothing to be scared of. They're not set in stone. They're not concrete. They're not chemicals. They're not genes. They're not DNA. They're thoughts. Yes. So be happy to greet them. Yes. Like the doctor looking at the disgusting cancer with his microscope. Can't wait to look at it so you can understand it and unpack it and argue with it, and then it will go bye-bye and fly away. But you can't make it go away by denying it. Yes. Got to have courage. Yes. Courage. This is the wisdom wing. But again, if you haven't got the courage to do that, then don't. People have a panic attack and they see their own mind. Take it where we're at. Do what we can. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Definitely.
We're the boss. We are the boss.
Yes.
I love being the boss. Are we communicating?
Yes.
Good, Prem. Yep.
One more question in regard to recognition of the world. I was thinking, passed to my mind in the break, that when I write a book, when I make a film, when I make a dinner, I love the process of the making. I do it for myself. But when it's done, I want somebody else to enjoy it.
Of course you do. Wonderful.
And I want to have the knowledge that it was a good dinner,
that's right,
a good book, a wonderful film. Because just by loving making it, it's not enough. Otherwise, I will not print the book. I will keep it in the drawer, or I will not make the film, or I will throw it into the garbage.
So the key to success is the reason you do it and why you want to give other people. The ideal scenario is this one we're using here, the two wings of the bird. The reason for your sake, first of all, just you to write it, is to help you sort out what you think and your feel. It's like it's your own process. It's your wisdom wing. And then the reason to share it with others is so you can benefit them. Otherwise, it's self-centered.
Well, I want them to enjoy it.
That could be benefit.
Yes.
But enjoyment, if it's going to cause them to be more deluded, that's not pleasure. That's not enjoyment. And I don't mean it's got to be all holy. If there's learning in it, if you can learn about human nature, learn about yourself, learn from it, develop compassion from it, and as well as have pleasure from it, fantastic. That's called helping people. But all this is, the reference point for all of this is ethics and morality. Do you see? Or not?
So morality is the ethics.
Morality is another word for ethics. Yes. Goodness. Anything you do that you offer to others, if it increases their delusions, that's not cool. If it makes people more angry, more depressed, more jealous, more craving, then how can it be beneficial? It can't be. It's impossible. That only makes people more upset and more unhappy. How could it be helpful?
No, but naturally, if I make them a nice dinner, it's for them to be more pleased, not to be more angry.
No, I know, but if you make a movie, let's say, that increases violence, there's just kind of blah, you know, or like sex all the time, increasing a person for a person who's attached to sex, increasing their craving and making them more distressed. I'm not being moralistic. I'm talking about the fundamentals in the Buddhist approach. The wisdom wing is all about fundamental lessening delusions and growing positive qualities. That's for your sake, and then what you do would help others the same. That could be anything, but that's the reference point here. That's the basis here.
Oh, you make it very complicated for me. But
no, it's not complicated. You just got to get used to it.
How can I be responsible for their reaction? I mean,
no, you're not. Hey, you're not responsible for their reaction. But that has to be your intention, your wish, your thought, your wish. You know, you can be the nicest person in the world, but a person can be paranoid and think you're evil. You can't help that. You can't stop that. You can't be responsible for other people, but you have to have the wish to put yourself together and then the wish to help others. And the more you put yourself together, the more wisdom you have to know how to benefit others. Because when you see your mind, you see their mind. Do you understand?
Yes, we come in. Thank you.
What else, folks? Yes.
Is
Melanie.
there a place for anger?
I can't quite hear.
Is there a place for anger?
Okay, the key to this is getting the definition of anger. And I really mean that. We all use the word, but let's get the definition here. So, like I'm saying, in this structure in Buddhist psychology of the three categories of states of mind, there's only three. There are those that are neurotic, delusional, distorted, and ego-based. There are those that are virtuous and reasonable and interconnected and positive. And then there are those that are all like the mechanics of the mind, like concentration, all these others that are neither virtuous or non-virtuous. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that necessarily one that's under the heading deluded can only be harmful, can never be in its nature good, because it's based on ego grasping, and it's based on me, it's based on my needs, and it can only harm others. Normally, what is called anger in Buddhism is that state of mind. So look at the wars, look at the terrorists, look at the pedophiles, look at all the people that do harm to each other. That's called anger. That can never be positive. So if you're saying you see fault out there, pain and suffering, and you go on a demonstration and you shout and yell, that doesn't mean it's anger. That could be compassion. Easily. Anger doesn't just mean you can still be strong and shout and be vocal, but genuinely coming from the wish to, from compassion. That's what Martin Luther King said. It's all right to be angry. He meant it's all right to find fault. There is racism. There is suffering. But don't just rant and rave about it, which is what anger does, but you say, what can I do to help? That is compassion. Do you see? Speaking strongly against something, but not out of the wish to harm the person. Like a child, it's like a tough love of a mother. That's compassion. It looks like anger, because, I've been naughty, you kept telling me not to do that, and now you have to shout at me because I didn't listen. But if you're a good mummy, it's coming from the true compassion to help me. Do you see?
Yes, but
That's
as a mother, I find this tiring, because I feel like I'm angry all the time.
But it is, if it is tiring, it's because it's real anger.
It's not.
No, it has to be, otherwise it wouldn't be tiring. It wouldn't be tiring if it was compassion. It would not be tiring, because you're play acting anger. But if it is anger, and until we highly realise there's going to be some anger there, of course there is, darling. But what's your point, though? Go further, what you're saying. Why you said it.
I think like there's a problem. And like, for example, my husband, he's annoying me, and I can't reach him. So maybe if I try the technique of anger at him to reflect.
I see.
It works. But I don't like being like that.
No, okay.
I want to give this lesson in anger to...
Okay, so you brought it up. Do you want to keep talking and using this as a discussion, or you don't want to go there?
Well, I don't mind, but...
It could be very helpful for all of us if you don't mind. So then, the first thing you said, with my husband, I can't reach him. This is kind of already quite packed, isn't it? What do you mean? He doesn't listen, he doesn't observe, he doesn't hear what you're saying, he's not there, he doesn't pay attention.
Something as simple as repeating yourself about the dishes, or the toilet set down. Can you put the toilet... It's just an example. Okay, now I get it. Thank you. Okay, now. Using the typical one of how we all are, you live with a person, you work with a person, and immediately you're going to start to compromise. You're going to have to. The classic one is, there's your attachment. Join the club, darling. It's okay, Melanie. Join the club.
that wants, so there's a right, so, you know, the attachment to have the lid down on the toilet, the attachment to get the dishes done, but it's also mixed with what's right. It's correct that if he lives in the house, he should do the dishes. It's correct that he could put the toilet down. You know, it's true. So there's one thing is what's correct and reasonable to expect, but the trouble is with that, when our attachment kicks in, and that's the annoyed part, that's the frustration part, that's the one that brings annoyance, irritation, upset, anger. So this is the point. Your choice is, you can ask him to do it. But if he doesn't do it, you have two choices. To completely accept it with a happy mind and do it yourself without any expectations, therefore you won't get angry, or you want to help him be more responsible, which means you've got to point it out to him again and again, like to a child. You've got to make your decisions. But not to sit there and infuriate about it and frustrate and give up and be kind of passive-aggressive. That is what makes us completely insane. So that's the part for you. Your choice is to accept, truly accept that he's not going to do it. Or, sweetie, leave the dishes. Do not touch them. Don't get angry. Let the dishes be until they pile up 6 high. Then he might, I maybe should do the dishes, he might say. So it's up to you to decide, and this is the part about being being responsible for our choices. This is the point. But this is the point. This is something so simple, but it's profound. This is normal life, and this is how most people's attachment works. In a relationship, you know. This is how it is. This is what causes people to kill each other eventually. One final dish is not getting done is too much. So this is where the choices come. You've got to choose. And I mean it with such sincerity. It sounds so simple, but it's profound. You either let the dishes be until he sees it, or you do the dishes with a happy mind and love him for who he is.
You have to let the be with a happy mind too. Yes,
that's what I'm saying. That's the point. Of course it's the point. Or you keep at him for his sake, not for your sake. And that's tough. So you've got three options there. The first one is probably the easiest, but not passive, not kind of resentful. This is so hard. This is why, you know, just to live with another person is the most difficult job on earth. I mean, it's just unbelievably difficult, you know. I can't even imagine how you do it. Really, sincerely. I mean, I made a decision years ago. Okay, it's just my karma. This is my life. I mean, I've been a monastic since I'm born. As soon as I went to mass, I knew priest was my job, you know. So anyway, whatever, the karma. But I remember when I was into sex and drugs and jazz, not rock and roll. I mean, clearly I wanted happiness. Clearly I wanted pleasure. But I never really wanted babies or partners. The thought of having me live in one house with one person, almost like I'd get kind of, my heart's in my throat. I'm having kind of a panic attack at the thought of it. The suffocation of it was to be unbearable. I never wanted even that. So then when I eventually gave up relationships, I remember the moment, you know, it was like I realised as a note, for me, my mind, that the pleasure, that the suffering that came with it, all this business, didn't make the pleasure worth it. So for me it was a no-brainer, you know. I'm a bit of an extremist, so, you know, I thought, bye-bye. That minute I gave up sex was like a relief. I mean, this is me, my mind. Because, you know, we've all got, I mean, it's amazing practice. It's like being in prison. It is like being in prison. Do you understand? It really is. And this is why it's so amazing to think of it this way. Ordinary jobs, ordinary relationships, nothing's fancy, nothing special. Learning every minute to see our mind and our... Because of course if you're in a relationship with the expectation to do this and do that, not do this and not do that. Of course that's the suffering of most people's relationships. You know, thwarted expectations, unhappiness, and it builds up slowly, you know, the little bitternesses. Ooh. So you get my point, Melanie. It's really tough, darling. It's brave practice. Either choice you make, it's brave. So go for it, baby. Yes. This is the inner prison. This is the inner suffering. I keep getting your name, but you have to forgive me.
Prem.
No, behind Prem.
Oh, Hava.
H-A-V-A. Hava. Hava wanted to know about the second kind of suffering. This is it. It's the inner prison, Hava. Go on.
I was just wondering, how do you practice letting go of expectations?
That's what the practice we're talking here. That's what we're doing.
It's
this is the darling. It's the talking.
Just every day.
It is every day.
A little bit every day.
This is the talking. This is the being your own therapist. Every single day, seeing it. It's like hard work.
Because we've had these expectations all of our lives, right?
That's right. That's right. This is why it's hard work.
Yeah.
You give them up by hearing them and then by arguing with them. This is exactly what an analytical. This is what a meditation would be. Melanie sits down there, you know. How many years is this going? 10, 20 years you've been together with this man? It builds up. How long is it? 1 month or 20 years?
7 years.
7 years, okay. So, 7 years of old habits, it's really hard, and the stronger the habit, the harder it is. But to sit there and make the decision to go through in her own mind, this is what it is. You make some decisions, you've got to make some decisions. You make a decision, okay, I'm going to try this method. I'm going to try the method of accepting it and loving him for who he is and doing the dishes myself with a happy mind. That is enough for you, and every day that's your goal. You say that one to yourself. We all know once you intend to do something, you'll do it. You've got to make the decision, that's what I'm going to do. And it'll fail, and you do it again until you get better at it. Like playing tennis, you keep getting better. But it's not cosmic. That's how you give it up, by thinking it and deciding it. Do you see?
Yes.
But it won't work overnight.
Right.
You just got to keep doing it. That's what daily practice is. Being humble with yourself, being kind to yourself, recognising it, seeing it flare up again, words coming out the mouth again. But you just decide. And the more you decide something, actually the simpler it gets. But we don't notice. But the fact that we notice that frustration, she can articulate it really clearly, And it isn't a minor thing. This is why people kill each other. Small things builds up, isn't it? You see, every day you say it, but you've got to decide, and that's the part that's really profound.
Okay.
Yes?
Hi, I wanted to ask you, many times we talk about negative energy, so many times we will say, oh, I don't like this person, I feel negative energy from this person, and so forth and so on.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you if, you believe, or according to your system of belief, if there is negative energy in people, number one. Number two, when I observe it or recognize it or feel it, there are two scenarios there. Does it mean that it really exists in that person and I am aware of it, or I feel it, or I observe it? Or does it mean that this person has a certain impact on me, awakens a certain fear on me, related maybe to this type of low esteem that you said before, etc. And that's why I feel that
I understand.
Meaning it doesn't really exist in the other person, but it eventually exists.
I understand, darling. Okay, there's two things.
And just one more point to that.
Yes.
And then, if let's say I want to distantiate myself from that, which means that I cannot practice real unlimited love and compassion for anything, that wouldn't be correct in that sense.
That's okay. No, one step at a time. So there's one scenario. First of all, there's a scenario, let's say, like that woman in Florida who was accused of murdering the police, right? So the story I told. You remember?
Yes.
Okay, good. So there she is, a completely innocent person, this nice lady, did nothing wrong. But you can imagine, can't you, the way she's seen by everybody. The police, the prosecutors, the judge, the jury, the people, the guards at the prison. She's seen as evil. She's seen as a cop killer. So that's actually what they would see. Now, clearly that's their story made up, isn't it? Now that, from her point of view, would be the past karma she created by falsely accusing other people. So in this life, even though she's totally innocent, speaking the complete truth, because of lying in the past and because of accusing others in the past, this is exactly what's happening with her. But the way they're seeing her as evil, talk about negative energy, they're seeing a monster and they believe she's a monster. So that's one scenario. She's innocent. She didn't do anything wrong. That could just be easily for you. You meet a person and because of some negative karma with you from the past with this person, even though they're innocent now, you believe they're dreadful. It could be that one. The other scenario could be, you're absolutely right. Because negative energy is a vague term that you could use to refer to the mind of a person who's got a lot of serious delusions, really angry, really paranoid, really, really delusional, really suffering, really jealous, really manipulative. Of course people are suffering. That's called delusions. That's what negative energy is. That you see one thing but inside is something else. And of course, so don't always... The thing is, be reasonable with yourself, trust that, but don't believe necessarily it's completely true, but be cautious and don't go out with them. They're a rapist, for God's sake. They might not be, but you've got to use some wisdom, but be realising also that maybe you're making it up because it's your trip. Because we can't... What?
Sorry.
Go on. That's all. So it could be different scenarios. You've got to be... The key thing is, we can't see someone else's mind. We're not clairvoyant. But on the other hand, we can see certain symptoms. They might be true, but they might be totally not true, like that woman. That could easily be just your own projection because of their karma, so it's a bit tricky.
Yeah, and so when you say, I feel negative energy from this person, I don't want to go out with them, the next thing I'm thinking is that I'm actually being judgmental in that sense. Okay,
that's my point to you. Suspend that. Be cautious, be reasonable, use your common sense, but don't think to yourself, perhaps it's not true, and if you're going to see this person somewhere else, you'll watch and observe and see what happens. But we can only use the wisdom we've got, but have some lightness about it. Don't be fixated in this monster, this guy, you know, don't believe necessarily that what you're seeing is true, but still be reasonable with yourself. You've got to be reasonable, you know.
I agree with you. It's just that sometimes when that happens, and then we reach all these levels that you discussed, I feel at some point that I'm sort of losing my own goodness by feeling this way.
No, the world is full of nightmares. It is full of horrible situations. Wisdom is seeing clearly what's going on. There is a war. There are people killing each other. You can't pretend it's just your negative energy, and it won't lessen your love. It'll just help you understand the suffering of human beings. So there's a reasonableness in it, you know. This is what they mean by wisdom. So in other words, if you were overwhelmed by lots of attachment, lots of neediness, lots of expectations, lots of anger, lots of pride, you'll be a very deluded person. Well, join the world. And then you're projecting your junk all the time, everywhere. That's what happens. But as you lessen your neuroses, things appear more clearly to you, and you become more content and more loving. As you get wisdom, you get more loving. Not more cynicism. No way. Clarity and wisdom come from lessening your neuroses, because your neuroses blind you from seeing things properly. Do you see? Excuse me. Excuse me. Yeah.
You spoke before of your feeling smothered. And you spoke before of the smothering.
Oh, me when I was a kid, you know, my own ship in life.
Being in a relationship.
Oh, yes, that's right, that's right. I wanted freedom more than anything. I wanted freedom.
You want the freedom.
Freedom.
But you're living in a society that you can't.
Yeah, that's right, totally free. No, that's
How
right.
do you deal with that?
Well, say it again, sorry. Start that last bit.
You're living in a society or a social climate that you can't be free.
The freedom I'm talking about too, the real freedom, not just doing what I want, which is what I felt, the real freedom is this one. You're in prison, but you can change your mind. That's the real freedom. That's where real freedom feels. Even though there's restrictions all around you. She was seen as a monster. She was in prison. She couldn't change anything, but she decided to change her mind. That's the real freedom. Then if Melanie learns to accept the way her husband is, she will act. I'm not being cliched, this is really profound. She will feel free. The frustration is when we feel our attachment doesn't get what it wants, that other people are preventing me. That's suffocating. So obviously when I was younger, I'm not where I'm at now, and that's not much further, a little bit. But the freedom the freedom now is the one of knowing I can choose what I think and accept the situation.
Instead of just backing off and being alone.
No, that's
being a recluse.
Oh, no, that's not the option either. No, that's not the option either. No, absolutely not. I can say with certainty, in my own efforts, to use the Buddhist view, to take it as my hypothesis, the way I explain the world to myself, which is the view of karma, the stuff I'm talking about here, this is the one I'm sincerely trying to apply all the time. Then by applying this approach, this world view, this is what's helped me change radically. Become more patient, more loving, more accepting, more generous, more kind, more forgiving, because I'm interpreting the world differently than when I was, say, a radical lefty or a communist. I was running around raging the whole time. Do you understand? It's changing my way of seeing is the real one I'm getting at. This is the key to it, changing our thoughts. There's this lovely, this freedom business. There's this lovely book written by one black American guy on death row in San Francisco. Finding Freedom, he called it. He was this young black gangster, and he got accused of sharpening the knife in prison that was used to murder a guard, and he's been in trials for years, whatever. But he became a Buddhist, met this Tibetan Lama, and he's written this beautiful book. It's just it's like short stories, but it's like it's biographical, wonderful, wonderful. And he's called it Finding Freedom, and this is literally the point. I mean, we're talking, don't think it's cosmic, This is why that Florida woman is so profound. I couldn't change anything. But they couldn't take my mind from me. Melanie. All of us. It's so outrageous because we want to change the outside. Everything in us wants to change the outside because we believe the outside is the problem. You get my point? It's so hard to go against this one. Oh my God. Yeah.
Speaking of changes, Robina, do you find that there is a shift in consciousness generally? Do you find
I don't know about that. I can't make such grand statements, Prem. I'm not sure. I mean, I think if you hang around with tennis players, you think tennis is kind of covering the world, I think if the whole world is tennis. But I think if you sort of start to do spiritual work, you kind of tend to think it's all getting better. Possible. I'm not sure. I don't want to say those things, and maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know. Just do the job ourselves and do it with a happy mind and be courageous. I'm not sure, Prem. Yes.
That's a question that bothers me since yesterday.
Yeah.
You can see around here on Paros goats that are tied in her leg.
Yes,
their legs.
yes.
And I was thinking to myself, maybe I will go at night and cut the
Right,
goats.
I understand.
But then I thought, but what about the farmer?
That's right.
I will harm him.
That's right.
If I'll do
That's
that.
right. That's right.
So
Often it's like that, isn't it?
So when is it? I mean,
appropriate to be compassionate.
yeah.
I understand. I understand. I understand. I understand. It's not always easy.
And by doing that, I'm
Yes.
judging him.
Well, even judging, yeah, it's true. But the one is, you know, this is the thing. That's the thing. That's the trouble. Sometimes doing what looks like compassionate, sometimes it's not our job. I mean, it's hard to know because, well,
you know, I see them every day from
I
the
know, I understand,
balcony,
darling, I understand.
and it's like
I
it's
understand.
bothering me if it's right for me to.
No,
raise
I
them
think those things.
or
I mean, no. Once you start this, then everywhere you look, you're going to see relationships where one partner beats up the other one. You're going to see mummies who beat up their children. You're going to see bosses who are mean to their workers. You will see it everywhere in the universe, and you will go completely mad if you try and run around, you know, releasing the unhappy workers, and releasing the people from prison, and releasing the animals from the slaughterhouse, and releasing the fish from the fish. You'll be exhausted, and it won't last long because they'll put you in prison. So it's nice compassion, but it's not very practical. So you do what you can. All we can do is do what we can.
Yeah, but I can cut the rope.
Okay, then you accept the consequences. And how will you help the goat? How will that help the goat? It'll start running, and where will it go?
Might be hit by fire.
Where will the goat go? You see, that's the point. It looks like it's free, but then the poor goat's so used to this, it then has to find food. It gets food from its owner. It then has to start wandering. It'll be wandering on the road. It'll be completely confused. It'll be more ignorant, more panic-stricken, because it's free. Thanks a lot. What have you done for it? So I'm not sure. In the end, you know, it's not that easy, is it? To see something as simple as that. It's not that easy. As the Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom. So the wisdom is the way. Compassion is the wish to help, but wisdom is the ability to know how, with a little bit of long-term vision involved. Sometimes, and that's where. So this is really getting us to the compassion wing now, and we'll talk about it now as well as later. But this is so kind of interesting one, you know. Compassion is defined as, so love is the wish that someone be happy. Then compassion is the wish that someone not suffer. So first of all, we've got to talk about suffering. Right back in the first noble truth, what is suffering? We did discuss the first one, the suffering of suffering, and that's the goat suffering, right? Mm-hmm. But then you've got the second kind of suffering, which we're talking about here, which is the suffering of the inner prison, the delusions, you know, the delusions of ordinary people who've got a lovely house and a lovely husband, a nice Melanie, for example. The inner prison of her attachment to join the club, you understand? That's more subtle suffering, but oh my God, it informs the other one. So then, if we understand that that is what suffering is, and then we first have to see it in ourselves. And it's like you've got compassion for yourself. I'm sick of this. I'm going to get out of this prison, you know. I'm going to change my mind, lessen my attachment, learn to forgive, stop asking my ridiculous husband to do the ridiculous dishes and do it myself and have a happy mind about it. Then he'll start helping you because you're not pushing him. And we all know, this is another point, by the way. You know yourself when someone's bullying you and pushing you to do something or expecting you to do it. We're very intuitive. We will stubbornly not do it. But the millisecond you stop expecting the space, you give your husband space. And he notices you doing the dishes with a happy mind, genuinely happy, and not asking him. He'll be so moved by that, he'll come and offer his help. Use it as an experiment, Melanie. Try it. We all know what it's like to be pressured. And we know mummy's pressuring us and daddy's pressuring us and everybody's pressuring. So we become resistant and stubborn, you know. You know what I'm saying, Melanie. It's a massive one to do, you know. Anyway, compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering. And then you go, which is a really powerful level of compassion, what can I do to help? But you can't really do that properly until you've done something in here, until you've kind of grown yourself to some level of clarity and calm and solid and less attached and less needy and more fulfilled and more joyful. Do you understand? That's the wisdom wing. You can't do that. The world is too unbearable, like we're talking with Prem, you know. So when you're able to do the compassion one, then you have this empathy. You don't only see the suffering of the people in the prisons and the goats, which is the suffering of suffering, but you see the happy, smiley people who are looking like they're happy, but they're in a prison, they're tormented. And you even are able slowly to have compassion for the guy who is tethering the goat, for the guy who's beating up his wife, for the person who's murdering the child, because you realise due to their past karma, they've got this instinct and they're going to suffer unbearably because of their own. So then you really have even compassion for them, which comes slowly, based upon the view of karma. Like, I always tell this story. I don't know if I told it here. I did. I mentioned Richard Gere that one time in 2003 when he invited the Dalai Lama to New York. And he also invited 20 former prisoners. Did I mention that or no? No, okay. So, there you go. Well done. Thank you. So I'll mention that again. So 2003, Richard Gere invited 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison. And he invited, we first of all communicated, and he was thinking of collaborating with our prison project. And then anyway, he didn't in the end, but it's okay. But he did his own thing. He invited these 20 people. He invited people like me to come for this all-day meeting. They were like Americans, a cross-section, male, female, Puerto Rican, Mexican, black, white, a whole cross-section of people who'd been in prison, who'd had some kind of meditation or experience, something like that. So we spent the day talking. It was very moving, hearing all their experiences and their suffering. And then they went to the Dalai Lama. He had invited the Dalai Lama to give teachings in New York, so they all went to that, and they had a meeting with His Holiness. So it was a very moving day. But he also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns. So remember the Buddhists, every word I'm saying here is what these young Buddhist nuns will be incorporating into their minds since they're born, the view of karma, the view of accountability, the view of compassion, all of these things, right? So there they are, young Tibetan nuns, early 20s, and they'd been imprisoned in Lhasa, for a couple of years, tortured and sexually abused. Whatever, what happens in prisons. So there they are, talking about their experiences, and they were kind of sad, tears coming, But what was first of all interesting, I think, for the Americans, was they weren't angry, and that's this point we were discussing before. It's kind of weird. If you've been tortured and sexually abused, you've got to be really disturbed, really seriously mentally unhappy, and very angry, and it's healthy to be angry. Well, it's clear they weren't angry. And that, like I already said, if we analyse what the words of anger, using this Buddhist scenario, anger is the philosophy of a victim. And please don't misunderstand this. We're all victims, Buddha says. Lama Yeshe would often refer to ego as the self-pity me. It sounds kind of cruel, but it's profoundly true, because it's the one of hopelessness and feeling imprisoned, whether it's the hubby not doing the dishes, it's the frustration, the irritation, the frustration, all this business. This is human nature. It's how we are with these delusions, Attachment, when it doesn't do what it wants, then anger. This is so simple but profound, So there are these young women who have the view of karma. This is the way they interpreted their experience. So that way they also have the teachings of compassion. So in the end, they didn't have anger. They weren't blaming. But they also even said at the end, very quietly, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers, because we knew we must have harmed them in the past. That's the view of karma. And this is where you can't just leap to that one if you're not there yet. You can't just tell a little victim who's overwhelmed by their bully husband to have compassion for the husband. That's a joke. That's why I'm talking it's got to be degrees, It's got to be degrees. You've got to know where you're at. So those young women, because they didn't have anger, they had their view, which is karma. They understood why these torturers were compelled to torture and harm them. Because they've got this intense relationship from the past, they're able to be accountable for this, and that gives them enormous compassion. So they couldn't have said that lightly. You can't pretend. You can't pretend, A friend of mine who's also Tibetan, he'd been involved in the first kind of demonstrations against the Chinese communists since '59. That was in 1987. It was like a mini uprising. And it was mostly the young monks and nuns. They're the ones who were really kind of radicalised, politicised, So naturally you see people shouting and yelling in demonstration, you think, oh, they must be angry, which is how we think. But my friend, Jigdol, he was telling me about the suffering. He demonstrated, he got arrested, got tortured, he was released, he demonstrated again, his friend had his head blown off. Then he decided better escape, so he escaped to Nepal. That's where I met him, in our monastery in Kathmandu. And then he said when he escaped, he's on this hit list, his father got murdered, brother got murdered, real suffering, and he's got tears. And I said to him, do you ever get angry? And he laughed at me. He said, angry? What for? Well, that's so shocking to our minds, kind of madness, Because he has the view of karma. He knows this view of accountability. You put yourself in this situation, so you're accountable for it. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to change it. That's the point. It's not passivity. Oh, well, I created the karma, you better keep murdering me. No, it'd be ridiculous. Conventionally, it's not appropriate. The Chinese communists tried to take Tibet, so they demonstrated, but not out of anger, out of it's correct, and out of compassion, of course. So anyway, back to the nuns, back to blaming. Where was I? I was going with that. Compassion. Yeah, real compassion win.
Richard Gere.
Huh? Oh, Richard Gere. Oh yeah, I think I finished that story. That was to illustrate the previous one, which was whatever it was. Going into compassion, I think. How, okay, you go in these stages. First you put yourself together, then you first you control your behaviour, then you start to know your mind by being your own therapist, studying to meditation, studying the Buddhist model, changing your own mind in this radical way, making new decisions, changing yourself, arguing with all the delusions, growing more strongly in courage and confidence and self-respect, less attached, less angry, less neurotic, more brave, more kind. Now you're really qualified to be able to see that the entire world, we're all in the same boat together, driven by the same laws, driven by our past karma, driven by our delusions, driven by our neuroses. Once you see yours, you see everybody else's, and you don't feel separate from it. This is my point to Prem. When we're ready for this, then you need to be in the world to really get compassion. If you don't ever meet suffering sentient beings, how could you possibly ever have compassion? So the point about compassion, though, and this is the thing I'm getting to, if we have compassion now, there's no question. Usually, though, only for victims, only for those who've been harmed by others. So usually then our compassion turns into also anger against those who harmed. So it kind of gets stuck, Or we have such compassion for all the suffering, we become depressed and despair and can't even look at anything because it freaks us out. So that's because of attachment. So let me give an example. I remember there's a friend of mine years ago, around now, she's a friend, who doesn't have a volatile anger. She's soft, she's patient, she's kind, she's sweet. Right? So she, though, like all of us, has attachment. But in a person like that, who, when they don't get what they want, they don't shout and yell. It becomes internal and fear and despair and depression. It goes in. Do you understand? It's internalized aversion. So what I'm explaining is this. There she is, really involved in the environmentalism, wants the world to be a better place. She got to the point where she couldn't even open her eyes when she's driving in the car with her husband. He's driving. She couldn't even open her eyes because she'd have panic attacks. She'd start seeing the horrible environment, then she'd have all the stories about her kids, and she just couldn't cope. She completely went nuts in turn, have panic attacks, fear like you can't believe. So in that case, Prem, for her, absolutely sensible, don't go outside until she sorted herself out. Insane, it would just make her mad, she didn't know how to handle it. So, but my point here, though, is more, there she is with compassion. She wants the world to be a better place. In her, with these days, it's more environmentalism. But when I was doing it in the 60s, it was different. It wasn't environmentalism then. It was kind of like, whatever it was. All the radical lefty thing, all the, revolution, blah, blah, blah. So there I was back then, also noble, also altruistic, also wanting the world to be a better place. That's the good part of us. How fantastic we've got that. But my virtue, my goodness, my altruism was also polluted by my attachment to get what I wanted. So what is a radical lefty? Out there demonstrating, so brave, but shouting and yelling. So having compassion for this group, but naturally having hate for the group who harmed them. This is the way our compassion generally works. You have compassion for all those poor animals, but you hate all the animal killers, and you go out and demonstrate and kill and shout and scream. Because we don't know how to have compassion without anger. Or, her case, she has compassion, wants the world to be a better place, but because her attachment didn't get what it wanted, which is the world to be a better place, the attachment, then she had a panic attack and freaked out. It all went inside, became depression and despair, which is internalized aversion. So what I'm getting at is, in the wisdom when you lessen your attachment, you lessen your neediness, you become braver, you can see the world, it doesn't freak you out, you know why it is what it is. Now you're ready to really have compassion, and it won't make you crazy, and you won't give up. Are you kind of hearing what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
We've got to know where we're at, So my friend, her aversion, which is what the response when her attachment didn't get what it wanted, that was why she freaked out. My attachment didn't get what it wanted, that's why I got angry. So if you don't have the anger, and you don't have the aversion, in her case, then she would see the world, and she'd have the courage of real compassion, which is not afraid, which sees it for what it is, which knows why it is this way, due to karma, And then you're able to never give up trying to help. It doesn't faze you. And that's the best level, Prem. Slowly, slowly though, you know. Do you see what I'm saying, Prem?
Yes.
Slowly, slowly. Go know where we're at. Be reasonable with ourselves. So all I'm saying is I'm seeing my own mind. I'm not saying I'm holy and wise and fantastic, but I'm trying to put this stuff, put my money where my mouth is, using this stuff, you know, this view of the world. Then my tolerance of seeing ugly things, which before I'd rant and rave and scream and shout and yell and blame, you know, I just don't do that anymore. I just don't, that's changed. I haven't suppressed any anger. I've changed the way I interpret the world. That's what's caused the anger to diminish, because anger is a philosophical viewpoint mixed with a lot of emotion, you know, which is the point I'm again making. All the emotions and feelings we have, once we start to go into them more deeply, you start to get beneath the emotional component, you get to see these elaborate conceptual stories, the philosophical viewpoints that all of these emotions are, you know. They're informed by elaborate stories. So it's unpacking these stories and questioning all those assumptions. This is what we're trying to do here. Of course, it's our choice. You can use whatever view of the world you like. You know, you're the boss here. I'm just talking to the Buddhist one that I'm using. Are we communicating? Okay. So let's look at compassion more then. Let's look at this equanimity. I know compassion can start today, the second day. Doesn't matter what day, we'll do it all. We'll start. Okay. So look at, you know, you continue from junior school as like control your body and speech. You live in vows, you don't kill, you don't lie, you kind of control yourself, you back off, you leave sentient beings alone, you try to lessen your delusions, lessen your neurosis, so you become a more disciplined person. Now you can afford to go to high school where you can learn to meditate, learn the concentration techniques, learn the Buddhist model of the mind to be your own therapist, really unpack and unravel this mess in here, you know, so you can grow the goodness and lessen the neuroses. And now you continue that job, there's no difference. You're continuing the job, but now in reference to others. Now you can come out of your cave and go and join the crazy world, you know. So others are grist for your mill. But still the same, you're working on your own mind. You're growing your own qualities. You're lessening your own neuroses. So it's like a series of little techniques, you know. And it starts with this foundation technique. It's kind of called, like I said, it's called equanimity. Well, this is a kind of simple English word that can be used in a multitude of ways. But here, like all these words, it's got a very specific definition. And so what it is it's the, you know, once you've accomplished it, once you've got it, what it would be like would be this clear, heartfelt recognition that all the friends who are the object of your attachment, all the enemies, the objects of your aversion, your irritation, your frustration, your annoyance and your anger, and all the strangers who are the vast majority of the earth, who are the object of your indifference, who appear to us completely differently now, that these friends, enemies and strangers are identical to each other from one point of view. They wish to be happy and they wish not to suffer. It's almost like a technical point. But everything in us resists this. You know, I know my beloved friend wants to be happy and I'll do anything to make, you know, Vasilis happy. But the enemy, as soon as I hear, well, he wants to be happy just like my beloved, the first thing I'll go is, well, what do you mean? He doesn't deserve to be happy. What do you mean he wants to be happy? We don't want to know about it. So this is almost like a really fundamental point, which takes time to recognize this truth. It's a fact, but hard to see. So why this? Why are we trying to get this equanimity? Meaning they're all equal in their wish to be happy and wish not to suffer. Because this becomes the foundation that we use to grow genuine love and compassion for all beings, because they want to be happy and don't want to suffer. Whereas now the only reason that's the basis of my loving Vasilis is because he makes me happy. And the millisecond he gives me up for the younger version, he goes into the enemy category and I no longer want him to be happy. I no longer love him. So the basis we use for loving people now is if they do what I want. The basis we use for having anger for people is because they don't do what I want. That's the point here. So equanimity is this recognition, stepping out of the equation. And you do these visualizations, you visualize, even now we can think of it. Except often the enemy, like your husband, is an enemy one day and he's the beloved the next day, isn't he? That's what happens. You get mad at your hubby today, so he's the enemy category, and then tomorrow you love him to death, so he's in the friend category. So the labels here, friend, is a general term used to refer to the objects of your attachment. The baby, the gorgeous one, the poodle, the people who do what you want, basically, who fulfill your needs. That's called friend. They look gorgeous and you go towards them. Then an enemy, we might use that word, but it's just used here to refer to those who don't do what your attachment wants. The ones who irritate you, annoy you, upset you. Especially, you know, the hubby who left you for the younger version, let's say. Or the uglies, all the horrible politicians and all the monsters and the meanies and the psychos. But stranger is interesting. Strangers is actually 99.999% of the universe. And why? And so what do we feel towards them? We have attachment for the gorgeous ones, we have aversion for the uglies, and we have complete indifference to the vast majority of the universe. And they're called strangers. Why? Because they neither harm nor help me. So in other words, the way we're talking here is what informs our liking people and disliking is attachment. If someone fulfills my attachment's needs, they will look gorgeous to me and I will adore them. I will want them to be happy and I will want them not to suffer and I will do whatever I can. If they who don't do what my attachment wants, Vasilis when he leaves me, then he's the enemy now. So I don't want him to be happy, and if I'm really not working on myself, I'll really want him to be suffering. I'll be glad when he suffers. I'll hope that next wife leaves him. You understand? And then the strangers, you just don't care less. You couldn't care less about the strangers. They can all drop dead. I always use this example lately. I always use my iPad. I read the news, you know. I look at my New York Times. And then down one day, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a heading on the front page. You know, you click the heading and there's the story. So the heading said, 350 people die in a ferry accident in Tasmania. Well, Tasmania is my people, right? They're Australians. I go, oh! And I saw it, and I saw that it said Tanzania. So then I went, oh, that's okay. Spontaneous, isn't it? Yeah. Why? Because they're strangers. So, of course, I caught myself and I read the story and I tried to have compassion, you know. But that's very deep inside us, isn't it? There's my people, there's the enemies, and there's all the strangers. Like many of the countries on this earth, you know where they are and you can't stand those people. You don't want to admit it, maybe. But there's some people we have aversion for, you know. There are some people we just adore, and then all the rest you wouldn't even know where they were on the map. So many countries, who? Where? Vaguely, Tanzania's Africa, I think. Where is it? But if it's your enemy, you know exactly where they are. If it's your friend, you know exactly where they are, you know. So this is the way the world is. And these are the three, for the Buddha, these are the three root delusions in this hierarchy that we're talking. The gross one, the root one, the primordial one is called ignorance, ego grasping. But a grosser level of how it manifests is kind of this profound indifference, uncaring, indifference. It's kind of like an ignorance. That you just see this vague, uninteresting person over there. You don't want to look, you know. Because why? Because they neither harm nor help you. The ones who harm you, it's very vivid. You can't stand them and you think about them all the time. The ones you adore them and you can't stop thinking about them. You see two people fighting, it's like they're attached to each other. You try and separate them, they say to mind your own business, and they'll keep fighting. Anger is ridiculous, you know. It's like attachment. You can't keep away from that person. Strangers don't even come into our mind because they haven't affected us. So again, the Buddha's view is, we've got the goodness. Keep remembering we've got the goodness in us. Saying goodness, we've got the goodness. That's what's saving us. That's what makes us be in this room as opposed to out there, you know, killing and lying and stealing. How amazing we can access our morality and our goodness and our good tendencies. It's fantastic. But so here we're looking at the pollution to see what's holding back our love and compassion. This stuff's dragging us down. So it's like learning to want to look at it, to see, because it's not permanent, you can change it, so not to be afraid of it. This is the stuff that drags us down to hell. This is the stuff that makes us miserable, and this is the stuff that causes us to not see others. So very clearly with this attachment, anger and aversion, and ignorance, there's three main ones. Enemies, friends and strangers. There's no fourth category on this earth, if you think about it. So this equanimity meditation is the beginning of this development of love and compassion, you know. Opening our hearts, breaking down the barriers between self and others, which are caused by the presence of these neuroses in my mind. So the very first step, like the foundation to set the ground ready, is to step out of the equation and to sort of, and there's lots of ways you think about it. You do like analysis, you analyse, you visualise these three people, and you think about it. You know, the friend, the friend, we observe how we feel about the friend, go towards them, adore them, love them, think they're wonderful, you know. And you know for sure they want to be happy, there's no argument there, that's clear. Now you look at the enemy, and you think, well, you know, to even get to the point where, especially if it's a person who's really harmed you, Already this is profound. This is not even learning to have love for them yet. It's like setting the ground to be able to love them. It's simply recognizing beyond the way you project ugliness onto them, past that, which is your projection, there's a human being there, a real human being. Let's say he's a pedophile. I mean, somebody who's really horrible, you know, really does horrible things to people. It's so powerful to do this. Just try and get yourself out of the equation. Stop being horrified. And basing all of your thinking on the view of karma, you know why this person, due to strong attachment to sex, and now he has attachment to little girls, you know, whatever, obsessed with it day and night, obsessed all the time, his mind never stopping. Can you only imagine the torture? You separate yourself from this person, get past your aversion, past your anger, past your fears, and you simply see a real human being with 2 legs and 2 arms, maybe and a nose and eyes and whatever, with this suffering mind, obsessive thinking, unable to stop it. Yes, they've got virtue there too, but they can't access. Their attachment is so running the show. But not even yet to have compassion for them, not even yet to have love for them, but to simply observe. Even though they're deluded, they simply are driven to be happy. But the Buddha's point would be they've got all the wrong recipes. They think by jumping on little girls it's going to make them happy. The person who thinks eating food will make them happy, and they get to 600 pounds. The person who kills others. Because we're driven by these ridiculous habits. So the fundamental point is their wish to be happy. Not even looking at their methods to be happy. They're clearly deluded. But the bare bones, they want to be happy. They're driven by this wish to be happy and the wish not to suffer. Every being is this way. It's something really fundamental. So at least here, there's sort of you're stepping out of it. And you're separate from yourself. You're seeing them from their perspective. And you recognize from this perspective, they are equal to each other. You know? They wish to be happy. They're not equal in terms of goodness. They're not equal in terms of their being nice to you. That's clear. They're simply equal from their point of view. You know? Or even a more simple example, I like to use this example from my own mind. Let's say, you know, where's Vasilis? He's not here. Is he here? Okay, he's not here. So let's say, there he is, my boyfriend, okay? Gone. So let's say, before I've met him, he's a stranger, isn't he? He's the bloke down at number 7. You've vaguely heard of Vasilis. Who? The guy at number 7? Oh, yeah, I know him. But listen to this. Because I've not met him, because he's not touched my life, because he hasn't done what my attachment wants, or he hasn't harmed me, then naturally he's a stranger, so naturally I don't care about him. This is normal. We never question this. So in other words, he's invisible to me, isn't he? He's this vague face. So then I hear that he gets these terrible migraine headaches, let's say. I hear this. So then I might go, oh, that's a poor bloke, I'm so sorry. Then I change the subject. Oh, pass the tea, please. You get my point? A stranger, isn't it? That's just natural. It's a stranger. To me. He's a stranger to me. So I see him in that way. I project my indifference because he hasn't touched my life. I see him in himself as indifferent. You get my point? Yes. So now, he's got this headache. Now let's say we meet and we fall in love. And I move into number 7 with you know, Vasilis. Look how it's changed. I adore this person. Day and night, absolutely in love, completely, because of this, want him to be happy, which is love, and absolutely have such compassion when he gets his migraines. Suddenly now I have such compassion. Now how come before I didn't have compassion? He was suffered just as much, didn't he? His headache when he knew me and his headache when he didn't know me was no different, was it? You see what I'm saying? But I couldn't have cared less before because he wasn't my friend. So now I think I'm so holy in loving him. But excuse me, how come I wasn't compassionate before? Because he didn't touch my life, because this is how we are. The point here about equanimity is, him when he was a stranger felt exactly the same as when he was a friend. You get the point, isn't it? It's so clear. But I don't see that because I see him only in terms of what he does to me. And therefore I respond accordingly. And excuse me, join the universe here. Everybody's like this. Now, let's say, 6 weeks later, he leaves me for, you know, leaves me for a younger version. Now I hear about his headache, and I'm glad. May he suffer. You kind of get my point here. But from the point of equanimity is this. It's so obvious, isn't it? From Vasilis' point of view, when he was my stranger, when he was my friend, and when he was my enemy, there was not a a millimetre of difference in how he experienced his headache. He didn't want a headache, right? So from his point of view, there was not a single difference in him. This is so simple, you know. You look, another way to see this, look at yourself. So you put, right in your life right now, you might have a person who adores you. You think of them right now to the left in front of you, and they're looking at you with starry eyes. They think you're the ant's pants. They think you're so gorgeous. They adore you. Now you look at a person who can't stand you. We all have them. They're looking at you with daggers. They think you're horrible. Now get the stranger who knows you just enough. They can hardly even look at you. You're so boring. You understand? You understand my point? So put yourself in the position of being Vasilis, except the other way around. You're a stranger to that person. You're an enemy to that person. And you're a beloved to that person. But you know yourself, you don't think of yourself in those terms. You don't think of yourself as a beloved. You don't think of yourself as an enemy. And you don't think of yourself as a stranger. You're just Robina, you know. Your headache is exactly the same. You don't want it. And you want to be happy every second. It's so clear. The point is like technical. But it's profound to remember it in relation to others. Not just to suck into our label for the people. So normally we therefore see, we know the friend wants to be happy. But because we have vested interest, we want them to be happy. We don't even want to know how the enemy wants to be happy because they don't deserve it. So we can't even think they want to be happy. They're just a monster. And the stranger, they can all drop dead as long as it doesn't affect my life. You hear my point? It's kind of clear, isn't it? So to think even this one, the simple one is the bare bones point. They're equal in their wish to be happy. They're equal in their wish not to suffer. It's incredibly sobering, you know. It at least opens your heart to see them all equal in terms of being a human being with a beating heart, you know. Already it's profound. We then begin to build up on this, to have ending up with love and compassion immensely for all, step by step, you know. Equanimity. So it's easy to do it all the time. Just you're in a queue, you know, to go to the movies and someone butts in. Just, Robina, shut up. They want to be happy just like you. Please come in. Right there, instant, you know. Right there, that second. The car on the highway, that second. They're just like you, Robina. This is you. It was a bit similar. There's another one later on where they say, all others are like you. It's a bit similar to this. Or you see the car, a person, you know, you see a person in the other lane who smiles at you. Can I come in, please? Oh, yes, you can come in. The other guy's aggressive and wants to get in. No, not you, mate. Well, the friend and the meanie want to be happy equally, so let the enemy in as well. Little baby things like this. Just practical in daily life, you know. Your husband, Melanie, you example because you talked about it. Just say, he wants to be happy. He's deluded, sure, he's a bit mean, he's a bit selfish, blah, 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 and he's also resisting me because I'm pushing him. He wants to be happy. Shut up, Melanie. He wants to be happy. So it softens, you know. Yes. Hold on.
When you let the aggressive driver in,
yes,
isn't that a way of rewarding, not helping? There's no compassion there in some ways because you're rewarding this rude behavior.
No, it's a practice for you to be kind to even aggressive people. It's for your sake, not his.
But it's also teaching him not to be.
Yeah, but he won't get the lesson. No, he'll just butt in. He'll say thank you, but that might be. So this is again, is it wisdom wing or is it compassion wing? If it's the wisdom wing, it's for your sake, to help you become more patient and humble. If it's compassion wing, you might not let him in.
But if he's dangerous, you don't let him in.
Huh?
If he's dangerous,
That's a different discussion, and you back off and let him in. It's up to what you can think. If he's dangerous, sure, but he's not going to bash into your car. He doesn't want to get hurt. This is where you're at. It's for your sake, let him in. That's your practice. For his sake, you mightn't let him in. But you've got to be clear, like with Melanie and her dishes, you know. We've got to know where we're at and really be in charge. You see, most of the time we're not like this. We just act on default. We just act according to how we're feeling that day. One day you feel patient, you'll act patient. Next day you're annoyed, you'll act annoyed. We don't have much choice. We're just running like lemmings, you know.
So how do you know when, let's say I'm waiting in line at the cinema, and somebody wants to cut in the queue.
Yes.
And my reaction is annoyance. So then for my sake, it would be a good thing.
Yeah, that's right, precisely.
But if my reaction was, oh, who cares, then maybe I should not let it in?
If you got the, no, not like that. Who cares is fine, let him in. The first one is for your own sake, to be humble and patient. Please go ahead. That's fantastic for you. The other one, though, is it's like I said before, you hear when Mel and I said about tough love of the child. You know, you might be a really wise mummy, and you've told me 4 times, don't do that thing. Genuinely for my sake, because the mummy has to be kind to them. It has to be wise, right? You've got to be wise in your ability to guide me, don't you, as a good mummy? But you see that I didn't hear you. I'm not listening. I'm stubborn. So the fourth time, you've got to shout at me. But if you're a good mother, it will be genuine compassion. It'll be for my sake. I will think you hate me because you won't let me eat that chocolate. But you know it's coming from compassion. So it's got to come from wisdom, your wisdom. It's got to be wise. So if this person, it's not going to benefit them, and you know, you're just seeing they're being really, but it's got to be for your sake, which means already your wisdom's got to be clear. It's perfectly fine to say.
How do I know when my wisdom?
Well, that's your mind. How do you know? I mean, like anything, it's not mysterious wisdom. It's like when you know your own mind. We were talking about all this morning. When you know your own mind. We know our own mind really well. Like, in other words, I use this as a simple analogy, but it's really powerful. If you are not a musician and know nothing about music, you know, I'm your daughter, you'd never heard of music, you would never see my potential for music, would you? Because you can't recognise it, because you don't know how to recognise it. Would that be true? Well, if you don't know your own mind, how can you recognise mine? But if you learn music, you can see it coming in me, you can see it. So the same with anything. You learn your mind, you use this model, knowing your own attachment, your own anger really well. You know me so well. You can see me clearly. This is why they always use the wisdom we have to come first. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. It's time for lunch.
Robina, I have a question.
Yes, Prem.
It struck me sort of quite strange, something you mentioned yesterday.
Okay.
That talking about incarnating into inferior lives.
Yes, Prem.
You actually mentioned that even people that achieve godliness are potentially susceptible to an inferior incarnation.
I've got to explain it, so I have to explain it in more detail. Let's just do it briefly here. The Buddhist view, Prem, is within what he calls samsara, the key defining factor, mentally speaking, of being in samsara is you have this root delusion about the I, the still clinging, even at a subtle level, to a conception of a self. We haven't gone into that teachings yet, which is the wisdom teachings in Buddhism, which is all about the nature of self. We'll go into this later. But as long as that's there, you're still in samsara, and so you can still have virtue. You've got masses of virtue, and one of the results of being of masses of virtue is being born in a God realm, which is like what they call heaven. So Buddha would argue the Christian and Muslim view of paradise or heaven, which they would say is the end result. You with me? That you're now finished, you've got the goal. Do you understand? Buddha would say no, there's still a subtle grasping at the self, and that karma will run out. Eventually all the good karma will run out. You still haven't removed the conception of the self, then you're still in samsara and you haven't finished all the karmic seeds and you're going to have a suffering life again. Yes.
So where does it all end?
When you realise, when you've gotten rid of the belief in the self. This is my point. When you've finally cut the belief in the sense of the neurotic self. They call it in Buddhism realising emptiness, which can sound so confusing, but I will go into this. This is the one. So Buddha says, we've had countless lives. We've been in the God realms. We've been wheel-turning kings. We've been amazing beings. We've had siddhis. We've had powers. We've had clairvoyance. We've had incredible qualities for countless eons of lives. But we've never cut the self. We're still locked in samsara. That's where Buddha diverged from the Hindus, literally. This fine, fine point in the distinction of what the self is and isn't. That's where he diverged. That's his view. Do you understand my point?
Yes, yes.
We'll go into that exactly, Paris. Thank you. So now let's have lunch. So I want you a little quick way to think about lunch, okay? Instead of the usual default mode of thinking of it in terms of attachment, and you go there and you go, oh, you smile, of course, you want to be a nice person, but you see the bread you don't like, or the peas that you don't like, or the rice is not my type of rice, or ugh, you know. There's still attachment informing us, isn't it? So we think of it from the point of view of kindness now. Let's just think of lunch out there, whether it's what I want or not. We think of it, all the hard workers, the people who cooked it, then the ones who cut it, then the ones who shipped it, drove it from the shop, the ones who served it, then the ones who grew it, the ones who, all these countless beings, including all the countless of trillions of insects that died in the farming and the growing and the cutting of these veggies, all the number of sentient beings. This is the handiwork of so many sentient beings. So we think, I'm going to eat this food with a happy mind so I can be fat and healthy, so I can work on my mind, so I can help others and repay their kindness. Okay, just that thought, all those seeds of the mind, so amazing, that will now kind of lessen our grasping, you know. Just those marvellous virtuous thoughts that inform our eating. How fantastic. So as Lama Zopa says, once you even think like that, something like that, before you shove the food in mindlessly, he says, now, the bigger your stomach, the better. So please enjoy it.
Thank you.
Okay.